All the way back in 1986, John Bon Jovi said, you got to hold on to what you got. And I think us synth people took it seriously. So welcome, you guys. Can I get a scum cheers in the chat? We're halfway there. Cheers, cheers, cheers. I'm Vulture Culture. Tonight, we're going to have a friendly competition between the 1982, probably the most famous analog synthesizer from the 80s, versus the Kawai SX-240, which is like the opposite. It is from 84, and it is ultra rare, less than 1,000 ever made, and maybe the greatest DCO-based analog synth of all time. So it's kind of a shootout between the underdog and the classic. And what we're going to be checking out is when we talk about digitally controlled analog oscillators from the 80s, there's really only two synths to me that really sound as lush as their VCO counterparts. And that would be the Junos and, of course, the SX-240. There's also the SX-210, which is a single DCO per voice, which I don't have, so we won't be comparing that. Might be fairer to shoot them out, but at the same time, this is more a friendly competition of like, hey, what are the lushest you could get from these DCOs, which to me, the DCO synths just have that like iconic 80s sound. The VCO ones can sound more 70s sometimes, for better or worse. Of course, we all love VCOs, but DCO synths are incredible too. So welcome to the channel if it's your first time here. Cheers. I'm going to drink again. Cheers if it's your first time. We do this live stream every Wednesday night at 9, checking out something to do with synthesizers, whether they be new, old hardware, or software. So welcome. What do you guys think so far? I'm just curious. Yes, the Matrix 6, which I have on the wall behind me, is actually my general recommendation. Incredible synthesizer, but it doesn't have a chorus built in, which is a big part of comparing synths like these. So to me, these are great, but Dub is right to point out that the Matrix 6 is probably my recommendation overall for DCO synths. If you wanted to buy just one DCO synth from the 80s, this is kind of a luxury thing because both of these synths are more expensive. And I'm lucky enough to have both of them in the studio for a time. So, what did you guys think so far? I think this one sounds warmer, but not as much of the low end. With the chorus on, of course, if we go and turn the chorus off here, and we do the same over here, we can see what an incredible difference it is really on both of them, how different it sounds. So I actually have an initialized preset here. On this synthesizer, it's in manual mode essentially, so we could just put in the gate, chorus off, envelope all the way up, sub oscillator off, sawtooth. It should be and octave down. So, and I have to turn the volume down here to get it right. So something like this should be volume matched. Yep, so pretty much right there. So we'll go real quick just through the sound. And YouTube compression hates the sound of raw waveform, so we won't spend too much time, but you can hear pretty quickly that the Juno-6 has a more smiley EQ to it, lots of high and low end. If I play chords, YouTube compression will understand it better. So immediately I'm getting that more of a quite a big jump in terms of high end here. lowest octave here. Brighter, kind of warmer down here. Jumping real quick into the filter here, right? Let's do the same thing on this synth. And for some reason, one of the only things I have to actually modify on the synth is the EG amount. And then we should be able to hear, what am I doing wrong? Too much resonance? Ah, that's what it is. We lose so much volume on this, so then VCF attack, decay, sustain, release. Dave, that's correct. These are gain matched. This synth can go a lot lower, so let's pull the... So what are we hearing, guys? Yeah, it's very Oberheimy, even though this is an SSM 2044 filter chip. What I'm noticing is this one sounds a little bit more wild, which, you know, us scum over here, we love a synth that sounds a little wild, a little bit of something. So if you pay attention to those filter peaks, you'll notice that there's a little bit more of a difference in there. Each one's kind of moving independently, whereas on the Juno, it's more predictable. On the Juno, though, to give it credit, the envelope is analog, whereas I want to say it's digitally controlled over here. So it's very linear on the SX-240. Keith brings up a point about how does it change over the octaves. So let's just go ahead and do that real quick. I would say they're actually pretty similar considering how different the filters are, really. Little less resonance. One thing is you do lose more volume with the SX-240, you know, as I control, like, here, let me put this back. And here's the sawtooth wave. As I increase resonance, you'll hear how much you lose. It's the point where the gate on the synthesizers You got that one value where it jumps to full self oscillation. Here it's smooth. Dave is all team Roland right now. We need a Kawai emoji in the chat. Can I get some scum cheers in the chat? So really what we want to focus on though for today is going to probably start with the chorus because that's what everybody's going to be interested in, right? So I turn the resonance down, cut off all the way up on both of these guys. And it should be about the same again. Right, and what people really care about is the chorus. So we'll turn the chorus on 1, and then we'll have the ensemble on here. So technically speaking, these probably use the same chips. The, what is it, MN3055? Can someone look that up for me? Actually, I need to know that off the top of my head. I always forget it. But basically, the famous Roland chorus is a chip that was used by a lot of companies. Let's see, I'm catching up with the chat here. Yes, it's on. I guess it does. It just jumps right into it at the end. A lot of synths from this era did because, and for what it's worth, I mean, this one's resonance will rip harder than the Juno-6. The 6 just barely gets there. So what's happening with this synth's chorus or ensemble is it's actually got more than one chip, so there's going to be more movement involved. And if you're familiar with the phrase bucket brigade delay, you'll be thinking about the fact that a bucket brigade, like the idea is you fill one bucket up with water and then you pour it into the next guy's bucket. Like if you're a fireman putting out a fire in a building, right? So one fireman pours the water into the next one, and each time he pours it, you lose a little bit of water. And so BBDs create this darker sound, and actually a thinner sound too, not just darker. On the first pass, you'll notice that it's darker. So without the chorus, there's such a volume jump, you might not hear it, but you're actually losing high end when you add the chorus in. Same thing here, you'll really hear it. And you'll also hear the low end drop out. If we turn the sub oscillators on, you'll notice that more. So let's turn the sub oscillator on. And then let's do the same thing over here. We'll turn the sub oscillator on. So now you really, really hear the high end in the Junos coming through a lot more. So this has almost more of like a poly 6y sort of darker, gloomier sort of sound to it. And then this is just that super bright. Let's put it in the envelope mode so we get some release. Let's go into the range over here and bring it up so we can kind of get the same thing. Now we have two separate envelopes on the SX-240, so we can add release. We don't need that much. And you'll notice that this ensemble effect is a very beautiful sort of thing if you want to do string sounds, a la the Roland VP330. So if you want to get those same types of string sounds, we'd add some attack. And if we put it on chorus 2, we'll get a little more swirliness. It's a faster chorus. Paul asks, how much are the differences being affected by the age of these two units and or their history or maintenance? Would a shootout with a second Juno still show the same differences? Brett, welcome. How's it going, Mr. Demon Hate? So that's an interesting question. And it's one that you see brought up a lot, especially in comparisons, right? People will say like, oh, well, two old analog synths from the same era will sound different. And I'm highly skeptical of that claim. Not technically, because all of any analog synth is going to have some amount of drift and like plus 10 or minus 10 variance. But what I've noticed is, even when you're comparing plugins to analog synths, they can get very, very, very close. And it wouldn't make sense if they couldn't get that close if all of these synths sounded differently. It'd be one thing, but it's just not the case. And even the fact that the plugins from different manufacturers sound like each other should also give away how similar these synths sound. So, like, yes, narrowly, technically, every vintage analog synth is going to be different. I do suspect my Poly 6 sounds a little unique, which is why I love it so much. It's got a sort of an interesting sound that I don't hear when I listen to other people's Poly 6s. It's a little darker, a little more muted. It might just be as simple as the filter cut off, although I have had it recently calibrated, so I don't know. Maybe there is something. But in general, I would bet money this was recently actually both of these have been calibrated recently. This is a very good benchmark Juno-6. If someone else's Juno-6 sounds a little brighter or a little darker, theirs could be even better calibrated than mine, or theirs is fucking off. It's one or the other. And it's a great question, though, because I think a lot of the times people go, oh, if a new Behringer clone or anybody's clone, whether it be from Sequential Oberheim, whatever, of the old sounds different than the old stuff. Well, all of those old synths sounded different from each other, too. And I'm just skeptical of that claim. I think, yes, narrowly that's true, but I think in the way that people care about, which is like, does this synthesizer behave and have the same character and all of those things that we care about as the original? Can it sound as good as the original is another way to say it. I don't think that's always the case. I think that often the originals do sound close enough to each other that you can shoot one out and go, okay, yeah, the new version either is or isn't as good. So that would be my rant about that. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So this is just like glittery, beautiful. My issue with the ensemble on the SX-240 is because it is an ensemble, it's got a little bit of a sound that for me, it's like, okay, that's going to work for certain things, not going to work for everything, right? So of course you could always pair it with a chorus pedal or something like that, but getting, because it's only running through one bucket brigade delay instead of 3 or so. I think it's 3 in this synth. I could be wrong. I'd have to look at the schematic, but you're just getting more high end, low end from a synth that already had more high end, right? So that's going to be the thing. And again, this is a friendly competition. We're not trying to say one synth is better than the other. So I think the real question for me is going to be, when we try to just max out lushness, which one's going to give us the better result? So I'm going to turn the chorus off for now. Let's add pulse width modulation in. So we have the LFO, which can create vibrato, right? Let's just use a very small amount, right? So technically there's some in there. And again, we're really just trying to get as much movement into the sound as possible, right? Going over here, let's turn the ensemble off. This synth has a great interface, by the way. Don't be turned off by the fact that you have to select things. It's so easy. So what we're going to do now is turn the pulse wave on, and we can choose between off, pulse width, and PWM. So if I go and turn the PWM all the way down real quick and turn the pulse wave on. So here's off, on, You guys should be able to hear that in there. Welcome everybody who's just getting here. Mike, I see you in the chat. Who else is here? Let me see what's going on. I think that if we go to PWM, we can control that. So what's interesting about this particular way this synth is set up is it's a little bit, it's a unique architecture. I don't think I've ever seen a synth that exactly works this way. So by stacking this pulse wave on top of the sawtooth like this, it's always a pulse wave. It won't ever be a square. Interestingly, you need DCO2 for that. So it can work as a brightness control. So with it off, you've got your saw. Let's put it on. And then bring it up. It's still not going to get you quite Juno bright, but it sounds pretty big, right? But anyways, let's go and put it into pulse width modulation mode. And now we just need to increase the LFO, I think, a bit. That is the wrong thing. I need to go to the LFO speed. So comparing these two when it comes to lushness, it gets really fascinating, right? Because of the completely different character of these two synths. Even though they're both 80s DCO based synths from 82 and 84, it's like they have such a different character, right? Derek Crystal Visions asks, what's the difference between pulse width modulation and a pulse wave? Is a pulse a square wave? Yeah, so starting with the square wave, the easiest way to describe it is like it spends 50% of its time up and 50% of its time down. Now, if you imagine that one bit gets narrower, so it spends like 75% of its time up. I don't know if my arm's doing this is a very good way to sort of try to draw a waveform live on stream, but that's like 50-50, right? If you imagine that this part of my arm doesn't exist right here, right? 50-50, 50-50, right? And then if you go more like 75, 25-75, so like 25-75 up, that's going to have this type of sound. We can demonstrate it easier on this synthesizer because now we can just put it into manual PWM. So here's a square wave, I think. Yeah, that's a square wave. And then as we narrow the pulse, that's like 50-50. This is what you would maybe call a pulse wave, which is there's different pulse widths for pulse waves, but when you hear someone say pulse wave, what they usually mean is not a square wave exactly, something where it's up and down. And not to get too geeky too quickly, but when we talk about harmonics, right? The way it works is all of the multiples off of a fundamental sine wave, right? So if you've got a wave at 100, then like at 100 is the fundamental, then 200, 300, 400, 500, all of those are different harmonics coming off of it. And a sawtooth wave has all of the even and odd. So that would be the 200, 300, 400, 5 on, and so on and so forth. And the square wave would have only the odd harmonics. So it would be, if it's at 100, then it would be, would that be 200, 400, 800? I could be wrong about that. I might be thinking of the math wrong, but I believe it's at 100. Then the harmonic series would be at 200, 400. And then as you increase the pulse width, or you narrow the pulse width. So you go from 50-50, again, trying to get my arms in here. This is so stupid. 50-50 to 25-75. Then you actually reintroduce some of those even harmonics that we're missing. And then we can take it very narrow, and that has this nasal sound. So what's interesting about the SX-240 is we can never turn off the main wave, I think. Yes, we can. Never mind. I lied. So let's turn the sawtooth wave off, and let's turn the sub-oscillator off. And now we can hear the PWM. And if we move this into pulse width mode, you can bring it all the way down. It's always narrow, like. So it's like 55 narrowness on the Juno. And then, of course, we can narrow it. So we get that really fizzy sort of sound. But we can turn the sawtooth on and then set this to pulse width modulation. Or I suppose, let me show you. So pulse width modulation just means the synth is using an LFO to automatically vary the pulse width. And so that's what this sounds like here. On this synth, it's the same thing. You can take it a little too far on this synth. It sounds very, very big, gorgeous sounding. So we turn the sawtooth back on, and we can do the same here. So we can turn the sub-oscillator on both of these. One advantage on this synth that we don't have over here is we don't have a level we have a level for the noise. We have ring modulation and things like that, but what we don't have is a way to control the level of the sub-oscillator. It's either on or off, like on the Poly 6. I would say if I had to recommend one of these to somebody just like off the rip, I think the Juno-6 is an easier recommendation just because the sound is so bright. So if you're using it for any sort of pop music, any sort of synth wavy type stuff, it's just going to get the job done. Whereas the SX-240 is for the real scum in the chat. Can I get some scum cheers in the chat? Those of us who prefer something a little less vanilla, something a little bit more characterful. So there is a trick up the sleeve that the SX-240 has that we just can't compare with on the Juno-6, which is as a second DCO per voice. So I just turn that on. You really don't hear anything until you increase the detune. And did I turn the sub oscillator on? Yeah. It's crazy how different these synths sound, right? Ed from Earth, how's it going, my man? I don't know if I shouted you out earlier, but I did see you. Just how much more high-end this thing. It's really, you can hear that it is a Jupiter 8 kind of under the hood, except for the oscillator, and that it's only got the one oscillator. But so let's bring in the filter now. I'll turn the envelope all the way down. And in this synth, the cutoff just doesn't go incredibly low, so. Let me turn the EG all the way down here. So it's almost exactly at the 50% mark. So the filter can drop 50% lower on the 6 than it can on the 240. Yeah, that's about right. And then we can increase the amount. And let's just take the attack off. Actually, even with the EG at all the way up, we have to raise the cutoff to be able to get the brightest sounds, or maybe use key tracking. Let's see how key tracking affects that. Yeah, so without key tracking, we're in trouble, but we can turn key tracking on. We have the same thing on the 6, so we'll just turn it on both to make it fair. Even though it's got one less oscillator, it sounds thicker to me, doesn't it? Crystal Love, how are you doing? How's it going, Crystal Love? That's right. This is probably more expensive just because it's rarer. It does have a trick up its sleeve I haven't shown yet, but members of the channel, people who've been following for a while, which I'm going to ask for another scum cheers real quick. They already know what the trick is, so cheers, guys. Let's add some resonance and try to match them. And so what we're going for here is just like a big old poly sound, you know? That sounds gorgeous. Let's see if we can match that. Let's go into EG and actually turn it down. It's just the high end just feels always missing on this end. So we need to get it lusher. So let's detune. I think I have a VCEG. Where is it? There we go. That seems fairer. I don't know the trick. The trick. You'll know it in a second, Damien, when I get there. Bill, that's a great question. I do not know the original MSRP for the Kawai off the top of my head, unfortunately. I haven't done either of these synths through the legendary test, which is usually when I look that up. We do have ways to thin it out, so we do have a high pass filter on both. Yeah, so pretty much identical, actually, surprisingly. I would say what's so incredible is even with that other oscillator in here, it doesn't necessarily make it sound thicker, I would say. Maybe if we turn the sub oscillator off. I think it's just the PWM being able to go a little bit more extreme on this synth gives it that little bit of an advantage there. They both sound great, but I do hear a little bit more lushness just in terms of the PWM. Incredibly mid-rangey comparatively speaking. So again, let's turn the ensembles on now and see if we've taken it too far. Nope, that's not what I meant to do. Ensemble on and chorus 2 on. It's just the Juno-6 is one of the best sounding synths of all time. I hate to admit it because I have a bit of a bias against it. I want to believe that, you know, some other synth is going to smoke it in terms of sound. But I think the truth is that there's a reason people love these things. It's just the way it handles resonance is very Jupiter 8-like in the way that as you crank the resonance, it also feeds more of the signal into the input, which compresses the signal, which gives you more of a meaty, weightier resonance. Whereas on this synth, you can hear the way that low end just drops out. And you'll hear it better even if I have the ensemble off. That's without. I love it when we go all the way, so prepare your cats. Even at full resonance, it's really not an annoying sound. It sounds badass. Ensemble on. You know, this synth has such a low, mid, warm thing going on. And then the sixth, I always say with the Junos, you could hear the System 8 lurking in the background, how they were moving towards a trancier sort of sound, something that would be what we associate with modern trance music, super saws and things like that. Because the high end is there. It's just crazy. And then with the Alpha Juno, which doesn't feed as much signal into the filter, you get an even brighter sound. Jupiter 6 is the same way. So it's pretty close. J-Rod, Ohio, welcome. Paul says, I definitely prefer the Roland so far. And yeah, I think it's easy to, in a way. So let's turn the sawtooth off in the chorus. We're going to put it into gate mode. And so now we're going to kind of do a baseline test. Resonance off. And let's see here. Now we can kind of get the same thing by turning the sustain all the way up. Going into the EG, turn that all the way up. Oh, and we need to turn the ensemble off, of course. Let's turn that off. Let's turn also off. Whoop, I didn't mean to leave that on. Let's turn the sawtooth off for this example. We'll just see. It just sounds meatier even with that detune. Let's go ahead and just detune it more then. Yeah, it's a little out, isn't it? So it's really fascinating how the PWM makes such a difference on this synth. Even though you could hear that it's a tighter sort of sound. And then again, if we just bring that release back in. Interesting is we get a little bit more of a squarey sort of sound out of this, whereas you can hear a little bit of that sawtooth. If you checked out our comparison between this synth and the Alpha Juno, you'll be able to see and hear that the Juno-6 has a little bend to the square wave, which gives it a little bit more of a sawtoothy sort of sound, for better or worse. Sawtooth back in on both of these guys and just see, To my ear, there's just something about the way that the high end breaks up in such a musical way on the 6 that leads you to the impression. I don't know what it is exactly psychoacoustically going on that lets this synth cheat so hard and makes it sound so lush, for what it is, which is a DCO synth. it if we turn brass on. We get that weird pulsing in there, which is kind of cool. Hearing there is the ring modulator actually on, and what's cool about this synth is we can turn the pulse width off and the sawtooth off, so now we're just listening to the difference between DCO1 DCO2 even though we're not hearing them. Yeah, let's turn that off, and the sub oscillator we'll leave on for this example for fun. And of course the fine tune. There's no doubt that the SX-240 can kind of go to more colors, right? Because we got nothing equivalent on the Juno. It sounds great, but... And we can coarse tune that oscillator too. Let's go for like a fifth. Oh, that's pretty brutal. So right here, wow, it's a super interesting sort of territory. Now, if we turn DCO2 on, this will not sound great because it'll be out of tune, I think. Oh, no. Actually doesn't sound so bad. Let's increase the fine tune. Okay, so this is an interesting example of how maybe using ring modulation we can get cooler bell sounds. Let's just see if we can get like some sort of bell tone. So we're going to turn the sawtooth off and set this into manual pulse width mode. Yeah, so this is going to be an example of all of a sudden, this whole stream, it's kind of felt like, it's so unfair. The Juno-6 is so good. Boring. Let's put it into LFO mode. Yeah, because there's no way to really break up that sub oscillator and kind of get different pitches out of it. So what's interesting is, as far as that second DCO, it's enhancing the lushness. I don't think it's enough. I don't think, yeah, it's for some reason, it's because you have so much going on with it. Because you've got a saw, a pulse, and a sub oscillator being derived from DCO1. So that's 3 oscillators basically, plus a 4th one. Whereas on the 6, you've got a pulse width, a sawtooth, and a sub being pulled off of 1 DCO. So you don't have quite the same thickness because you have a second true DCO on this end. But because it's only adding that extra 25%, it's not giving you enough really to overcome the hurdle, which is the better pulse width modulation on the Juno-6, right? You just get a lot more out of it. However, when you start playing with ring modulation and things like that, all of a sudden, that's with DCO2 off. catch up with the chat. Parbs, how you doing, my friend? Can I get a shout out? Can I get a scum cheers for Parbs for being part of the community for so long? I don't think I've ever given you the proper shout out you deserve. So cheers, Parbs. Robert M says, what's different about the Juno that commands so much more value than the 3P, 8P, and 10? When on paper, those have more oscillators, I think. Yeah. The biggest thing by far is going to be that it has the faders built in, right? Because on the 3P, 8P, and 10, you don't. In fact, you could see the 10 just over. Well, you can't really see it on stream here, but the 10 is lurking. And what's going on with the 10 is it's a really powerful synth, but it's all hidden if you don't have something like a programmer like this. This synth you don't need the programmer for, by the way. I know 40 Thieves and I both have them, but this is a very easy synth to edit without a programmer. It's just like the Kawai K3. It's not really necessary, in my opinion. Whereas even with the JXs, you kind of do want one. They don't have quite as easy of an interface as this. And then the other thing is the JXs do have multiple oscillators per voice plus the chorus, but it doesn't do pulse width modulation. So that's what's so terrible about, well, that's what's so great and so terrible about buying vintage synthesizers. And Ian Dixon and I had this conversation over on his podcast. If you haven't checked out his podcast yet, his podcast is great. And he's always talking to different people in the synth community. But I'll summarize part of the most recent conversation we had, which is to say he was asking me about what my thoughts were on vintage synths and which to buy, modern and vintage. And I said, when it comes to the DCO synths, get any of them, but don't get too many of them because they do all have like a similar flavor. And what's interesting is they don't necessarily like, you should just pick the one that you want because they're all hamstrung in some way. Like there is no perfect DCO synth. The closest thing you're going to get is the Matrix 6, but it's got a terrible interface. I am still working on a programming tutorial for it that uses an editor, but if you're just doing it on its own, it's rough, you know? And, but it's like the closest to being fully featured. Matrix 1000 works too. You can get it for under $1,000. And then the rest of them, it's like the Junos are great, but they only have one oscillator per voice. The SX-240 is very quirky. The JXs don't do pulse width modulation unless you do the Vakoven PWM mod. The Alpha Juno sounds great, but not everybody likes it as much as the earlier Junos. What are some of the other ones? It's like the Korg Poly 61, no chorus on it. Right, but it's got 2 DCOs. Filter doesn't sound as good as the Poly 6. Kawai SX-240, kind of in the same ballpark. Lots of rip and resonance on that one. What are some of the other DCO synths from that era that I'm not thinking about? Sequential didn't really put out a DCO synth, but I would say, you know, the 6-track and the Kawai SX-240 and the even the Prophet 600, even though it has VCOs, it's kind of in that ballpark. As far as the sound, it's just like a brighter sort of sound. And I don't even think it's the DCOs or anything. I think it's just at that moment from like 82 to 86, the manufacturers are like, we have to compete with the DX7. We need to make brighter, more, you know, can't just be warm. It can't just do the Juno thing. It has to do something else. And, so I'm very fascinated. I've got, DCO2 off now. Let's apply some LFO and see what happens. So that modifies everything, which is fine. Let's add some noise in. Oh, it sounds so beautiful. Over here. Oh, it's not there, is it? sounds. Twin Cities Oxygen. Shane, how's it going? By the way, how did your charity event go? I saw it happen. I'm sorry I couldn't attend it, but I think it was super cool. You know, what a great thing to do. Cheers, guys. Dub Station Zero asks, just had a thought. Could you get a tine sound out of a ring modulated thin pulse, the envelope mods through zero to disappear? Let me think about that for a second. Well, so when you're saying, could you get a tine sound out of a ring modulated thin pulse? Well, let's fucking see. Let's see what's going on. So the pulse so the ring mod is not affected by PWM, or is it? Let's go see. Let's turn the sub oscillator off, and then let's control the PWM and see if anything changes. I have to turn the noise off too, but it just... Yeah, so the ring mod is not affected there. If we turn pulse width on... Why don't we take the ring modulator further? Wow, you can take this so far. Oh my god, it can do a DX7 tine. It's not doing it exactly the way you were saying, Dub, but... Nenko, how's it going? Harmonic Sonics, welcome. Hypothesis 13. Can I get a scum cheers for some hypothesis in the chat? Twin Cities, Shane says, went pretty good. Raised 600 Canadian. Lots of cool performances. The donation link is still open. Feel free to drop that in the chat if you want. What wristwatch am I wearing? I'm wearing a Diesel wristwatch, and it's not, I wouldn't necessarily recommend Diesel. The only reason I use them is because they seem to take a little bit more of a beating than like if you get a fast fashion watch off of Amazon, you know, but they're fine. I am not recommending them. Yeah. Oh, I love that, Brett. So that's like a fucking DX7. Now I'm curious if we take it kind of out of key a little bit, but we bring in the other, let's turn on everything else, you know, and then... So it's out of key. It is out of key. We can turn it off and on. You know, depending on how much we want of it. I think I like it with the sawtooth off, and then we just need to bring the filter down. And tighten it up really hard. Maybe key tracking down. You know, like fitty. I kind of like it out of tune a little bit, but we could get it in tune if we wanted. into range. And then we need to go to, let's see, what is it? Memory protect. Is this it, right? It's been a while since I worked on this, and I always forget these things. Memory, right? Let's try it. Name, and let's call this one, let's call it, I love that you can type with the keys. Crystal. Nice. And then I just hit right again, right? Nope. Right. Let me try it again. Crystal. What am I doing wrong? Somebody look up the manual. Crystal. And what do I need to do to finish her off? No. No, I think maybe it's slid. Crystal. Oh no. Come on. And right. No, what am I doing wrong? Oh, maybe I need to hit D5. Let's try crystal. Maybe I'll misspell it too. That would be very cute, wouldn't it? Crystal and then D5. There we go. I think that did it. All right, so this is the whole fucking shit, guys. So we've gotten this whole way. We've created a new patch. This is like as good as we're gonna get on this synth, right? You know, they're comparable. Beautiful, right? Now we're going to put it into, let me just make sure that worked before I jump in. Yep, so we've got it. And we're going to go into dual mode, D5, and then the lower, how do I get to the lower? How do I pick the lower patch here? So that was D5, and then D5, right? And then I forgot how we do this on the lower is D5. Now here we go. Now we have the stereo 4 voice. Even if we put in the chorus, so about it. Talk about this. Damien, it's a free VST. Full bucket is free. So that's the trick, is that in this synth, we can put it into dual mode like you can on a Jupiter 8 and have two patches, but it's freaking awesome when you do it with one, because you just get this giant stereo sound. It sounds so good. And, you know, so we're able to make some sounds on the SX-240 that the Juno-6 couldn't dream of. And that's what's, you know, what I like out of a synth is when you can kind of take it someplace else. You get something like a ring modulator involved, and all of a sudden you're kind of going in a different direction than you would if you were just messing with it. Cheers, guys. Is that to say that the Juno doesn't sound good? Eric Walker, welcome. Help fund an Andromeda. Oh, very exciting. I think, Robert, that the VSTs have gotten very, very good. I still hold on to the vintage synths, but actively shopping for one. The Kawai, whether I get that, the Juno-6 or the Poly 6. So what I will say, Sam, is if you go back and watch the Poly 6 Juno-6 shootout video, if you haven't yet, I want to say it was some very large percentage of the chat preferred the sound of the Poly 6 over the Juno-6, even if they cost the same, which usually you can get a Poly 6 for a lot cheaper. It's been a while. As soon as you put some stereo effects on it, and then the 240 just would be interstellar. Skeptic asks, which synth has better highs? That's the Juno-6 easily. Much more of a high-end oriented synth. You know, the Japanese at the time really loved this like hi-fi, really bright sort of character to it. So we could go back into regular mode. And all we really need to do to open this up even further, let's add just a little LFO. Oh, it's interesting. We can't really hear it because it's not... Oh, I'm on the wrong mode, I think. I need to be up here. Here we go. Three is a little too warbly. It's a little lo-fi keys. Two is good. Let's go to the LFO and slow it down even. I'm going to increase it a bit so you guys can hear it easily, and then slow it down. Something like that, and then bring it down from 10 to 2, so a fifth that intensity. Because we have pulse width. What do we have it on? We have pulse width. So let's go ahead and memory write that again to D5, right? Very subtle amount. Now if we go into D5 and upper, lower is D5 and upper is... So we should have two LFOs, because that's what's beautiful about having this synth, is we have two independent LFOs on the left and right channel. So even though that 2 of 50 value or whatever LFO doesn't seem like much, now we're detuning the left and right channels for an even wider sound. For fun, let's go back out of dual mode. Let's go into the LFO and increase it just a little more. And let's see how that sounds. D5 dual mode, upper and lower are both crystal. actually think it's a little too much, just a little bit. But I could see someone loving it. Oh, the lowers. There we go. No, I don't want to be. I want to be on upper, and let's just bring that down. Memory right. There we go. Oh, that's true, Keith. I didn't mean to imply that Kawai was somehow not Japanese. I mean, more that Kawai generally had a darker sound, and you hear it with the Kawai K3 as well. Like, it's just, they're darker. The Poly 6 is darker, too. I guess I should have said, like, maybe Roland and Yamaha were going for that brighter sort of a thing. I'm sort of parroting what I've read from books like Vintage Synths by Mark Vail and stuff, which are, tales from the designers of synthesizers back from the 80s. I think the book came out around 99, right? And you can hear that the way that rock stars and designers from the time talked about the Japanese synths as generally having a brighter tone to them, for sure. Yeah. Robert's struggling to create a pulsing vibe with a VST. Yeah, I love yeah, it's the goth Japanese. I think so. I think Kawai's like super underrated. And in general, this one's a bit of an exception because they're so rare. This was right before they began their transition to digital. So it kind of has a unique place in history because it's just late. It came out in 84, 2 years behind the Juno-6, which was already kind of the last. This is definitely one of the last golden age analog synths. So 2 years doesn't sound like a lot because since like Hydra Synth and Novation Summit have been around for a long time and have just sort of stood the test of time already as being like the tops of their categories, right? But back in the 80s, things were progressing so rapidly that yes, something as short as 2 years, this came out and felt like it was already history. And so they didn't sell a lot of them compared to, I want to say they probably sold more K3s than they did these, which is crazy to think about because nowadays this would be probably more desirable. Although I love the sound of the K3 as well. Williams 88 key digital piano. Sam says he picked up a Guitar Center. That's pretty cool. I saw a tutorial once on creating a detune synthwave bass on the Poly 6. I'm assuming that's using unison mode because it's also a one oscillator per voice synth. Sentai says biggest issue with VSTs isn't the sound, but the latency is brutal. Yeah, so you might want to play with your what's the word I'm looking for? Buffer size, and try to bring that down. You probably already know that, Synthonic, but if anybody's having latency issues, because you're hearing these hardware synths through a DAW, right? So you're hearing it with latency. And I'm hearing it with latency, right? Like it's going from the synth to the DAW to my headphones, and I'm not noticing it. It feels instant because it's within that 11 millisecond window of perception. The moment you're like past somewhere between 7 to 11 milliseconds, then your brain starts to notice that it's a little bit behind. But when you're within that, your brain sort of auto corrects and you don't notice. So you might want to just play with your buffer size a bit. Keith says, I remember reading about the Kawai synths in Keyboard Mag and being like, ooh, that sounds interesting, and going back to my TX81Z. Mighty Pinto, welcome. Yeah, I think that was a lot of people, for sure. Let's go pick another. So I have another init patch here. That was a fun one to make. Do we have any requests in the chat for any other ways we'd like to compare these synths as far as types of patches and seeing which can do better? Because when it came to bells, the Kawai just smoked the 6, which I was surprised by. I think the Alpha Juno could weirdly maybe do better as well, just because it can separate that sub-oscillator by another octave, which is a cool thing. While that's happening, I'm going to play keys so I don't bore you guys while I'm waiting for a viewer request. Synthsonic, spiritual anarchist, welcome. That's what it was, the hold key. I was like, what is fucking happening here? Synthsonic asks, am I still doing the Dopey Challenge at Walt Disney World this year? Yes, I am. What would it have been? Yesterday, I ran 14 miles. Now, when I say ran, I want to make this clear. It's a jog. It's a barely above a power walk. It's very what I call grandma pace. I'm just kind of chugging along. It's still, though, difficult to do 14 miles. I want to bump those numbers up. I usually try to be able to run pretty close to 20 miles before the Dopey, and then I'm in good shape for it. 19 miles is fine. If I do anything less than that, I might freak out a little bit. So that's the goal in the next few weeks, is to get those numbers up. Let's see here. Damien said pads. Brett said aggro industrial bass. The only problem with that is neither of these synths are necessarily going to get there. I've done industrial bass on this before. I mean, you can get kind of skinny puppy with just this. Like, that sounds pretty industrial to me. Like, you could hear a band doing. But neither of, that's kind of like almost like a Pro 1 type thing. But aside from that, it's not really going to get there. But I did see Damien say pads. So I'm going to go for that. Robert says, Alex, I have a question. Floaty pads is Keith's choice. If you had to do a Sophie's choice and just pick one of these instruments in 30 seconds, which one would you keep? So if I got 30 seconds to think about it, I'm keeping the Kawai SX-240 because it's just more unique. I'm on the fence about the Juno-6 because it sounds so good. And, I'm a snob like that. I care about things like filter compression, but I mean, just as an example, like when we were able to create a really cool bells sound out of this, that's just not even possible on the Juno-6. Continually surprises me. And as a sound designery type guy, I want to have that extra flexibility, but I have to admit that the 6 just delivers. And sometimes when you're under a deadline, like I had a project for one of the artists I worked with, and they sent me their MIDI files, and they were like, can you run, these files through your synths to sort of do a quick remix for a live show? We need like some backing tracks. And I was like, sure. And just running things through the 6, it was just like immediately good in a way that like I have to spend some time programming this. So when you're under a deadline, the 6 is a great synth. But for me, yeah, if I had to pick one, aside from the fact that it's the most beautiful synth visually to me, and also of its rarity, but even still, I think if it was the same price, I would probably still keep this one. I have a fondness for this synth. Over time, it took me a bit, for sure. Yes. Spiritual anarchist. I don't know if I said hi, but I love that. So, yeah, that's exactly right, Aquatic. Sam asks, how does the SX-240's lower register saw wave octave rumble growl compared to the 6's? Well, we could check that out with the sub. Let's turn the sub oscillator on. And we have to turn the range on. So just very different sounds, right? And that's with resonance, right? I guess I could do the same thing here. Much more of an acidy type sound because of its more mid-rangey thing to it, right? You know. Actually, could very well be. I'm not like an acid synth type guy, but you could definitely use this synth. The SSM sort of has that character to it. Anyways, I just wanted to touch on that briefly. Yeah, no fucking organ patches. I recently did some sounds for a synth and submitted them. The company sent back what they accepted, and it was the one fucking organ patch I made. And I fucking almost lost my shit, guys. I did one organ pad sound, and they were like, yeah, we like that. And I was like, I'm fucking so pissed. I'm a sound designery type guy. Yes. Brass sounds. Yes, this has some cool brass sounds. The oscillation overthruster. Let's see. Okay, good. I'm sorry, spiritual. So let's do some pads. So we've sort of done this one before in a way, where we're going to increase key tracking, envelope amount. Resonance is very high, just shy of self oscillation. Very cool. Cutoff is at 0, right? So we're going to try to do basically the same thing. Resonance just shy. We have to put it into gate mode. So we're going to put ADSR all the way up on this and see what we get. So on this, to get that, we're going to need to turn VCF sustain all the way down, attack decay all the way up, release pretty high too. Sustain can be all the way up though. So we do have the advantage on this synth of having two separate envelopes, and therefore we will probably have more power to the sound. We need to add some attack. This synth is going to just have much more range on it overall. So let's just try and see if we can match these first and then... Okay, let's go more like here. The brightness on this synth. But it's got so much fullness. Because over here, we've just lost so much low end from that SSM filter. we get some more interesting textures because of how far we can detune DCO2. So we almost need to take the range up to make this work. Such a great bread and butter synth. Like, you want a pad, here's your fucking pad, you know? It's so good. And then over here, you know, it's a completely different neighborhood. We have such a different range that we can go with this coarse tuning. Let's warble out the LFO. Do the subtle modulation we did earlier. Let's go to the amplifier, and we have attack, decay, sustain, release, but we can also modulate this with the LFO. So we can do amplitude modulation here too. Now, if there's any way we could get a Eurorack module into the expression pedal into this so that we could control the speed of the LFO, that would be so fucking hot. We can add a delay to the LFO, which we can actually do up here too. Sounds really great. You know, the amount of LFO, even at most, is very, very constrained. I'm going for an organ. I'm trying to get there. I'm trying to do an organ for everybody. You know, I'm trying to my best. Let's just increase the speed. And then just dial that back. It's a little intense. instruments. It's going to be very talky. It's going to be very thin, you know, especially with an SSM. It's going to have that sound. Who in this chat talking about an Andromeda? Nothing wrong with the with an organ shame. It's just not for me most of the time. I love it. They both sound good, don't they? I would square wave that LFO. So my thing about square waves with something like amplitude modulation is it begins to imply a more of like a rhythmic thing, which can be cool, but Keith, on this particular patch, because the square wave on this synth, the LFO is very rounded. It's like slewed. It's not a perfect square wave. It'll sound good when we put it into stereo. Lusting for the Prophet X. Oh my God. And the Octo Saw patch nearly perfectly mimics an O'Brien Made voice. That's pretty cool. I've never actually messed with one of those. What else can we assign? Can we assign that LFO? We're already PWMing. We've got the LFO at 2. All right, so I think we're good to write it. So let's go to memory write here. Let's go to memory write, and we're going to call this organ pad. There we go. Nice. And we'll write this to D8. And it should be written. Nice. So fine. Whoa. What happened to the release? Let's just add that release back in. And now we should be able to put it into dual mode and select organ pad, and then lower is organ pad, and we should have a lot of movement because we have these independent LFOs running. We'll see how it goes. A choice was made, you know. It's definitely going to be somebody's favorite, you know, kind of vintage Farfisa sort of sound to it. Of course, you could put the ensemble on, right, on the upper here, and let's turn that on, and then go to lower and turn that on, and you know. Praise Jesus. You ain't got to be poor anymore. That's for sure. You guys did it. I did an organ pad. I have regrets, but it's okay. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, the stereo is pretty great as far as it is. It's good. The 6 sounds so good though, you know, it just... I'm beginning to feel like the 6 is an unstoppable force for what it does. Like for what it does, the 6 is hard to compete with. I can't really think of any synth that I'm going to put against the 6 and is going to do what the 6 does better, you know? And maybe that's because part of it is like in our collective unconscious, right? We've all heard these sounds so much from the Juno-6 and synths like it, that we recognize and we go, ooh, that's the Juno bass sound, or ooh, that's like a Juno bells or PWM strings or whatever. The SX-240, synths like the Poly 6 and even the Alpha Juno, they're going to be more esoteric sounds you're going to get out of it, you know, stuff that's not as common. Such a funny sound. Something I never thought I would do. You know, it's just got more of a different sort of vibe to it, for better or worse. And for me, I like that it takes me to places that I wouldn't be able to get, you know. This doesn't have amplitude modulation. It doesn't have a lot of what we're using to get these cool sounds. And the dual mode is gorgeous, but there's an undeniable charisma to the Juno-6 that cannot be defeated, and I'm pissed about it because I really wanted to sell this synth. I really wanted to buy it, put MIDI in it, have it tuned up by Ramiro at Sever Machines, and then sell the motherfucker for twice what I paid. And it's just not looking like that's gonna happen, tragically. It's just a little bit too good. Oh, I have rolled over my cable here. Okay. Going back to the computer to finish this out, we'll kick a little music on, you know, and yeah, it's been fun on this one. But what did you guys think? Which was Lusher? The SX-240 in let me go here, let me turn this back on. Was it the SX-240? Let's get this in here. Start a poll. Lush winner. When I say Lush, I'm not talking about myself. The SX-240 in dual mode, or can't beat that Juno chorus. Let's see what you guys have to say. Very curious. I haven't played the Form synthesizer yet, Spiritual. Bill says my only hands-on experience was the K1, K3, and K4. Those are the other ones, and the K5000S that I've had. You know. I actually observed a boomer playing basic blues, pentatonic scales on Guitar Center. I couldn't help myself. I yawned and patted my hand over my mouth as I passed by. Love it. Banana Rider says Juno has that ting, but 240 has full flavor. Harmonic says this is Lusher, but the dual is pretty good. Thank you, Eternian. Yeah, it was fun. They're very different, you know. They really are. And for me, it was a lot. It was a good thing. I appear to have lost some frames there, so if I broke up for a second, I apologize. I feel like my internet needs to get touched up again. I like the Juno, especially when you ripped out the organ music. What I always was interested in was like Melissa by what's the name of that band? Allman Brothers uses hexatonics. It's like harmonized in hexatonic, I believe, which you don't hear all the time, you know. Spiritual Anarchist says Form sounds better than Minilog XD, just wish I had slightly more polyphony. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. I wouldn't be surprised if the polyphonic aftertouch is also kind of more fun than the XD, which I don't even think has aftertouch. Of course, you can MIDI it in, but I think it's like the Prologue where it doesn't. You know, the XD is an incredible synthesizer. It's just getting a little long in the tooth for the modern synth market. Korg, if they even care about analog anymore, which they don't have to, considering how well they're doing with the digital synths now. But they could always go back and do some sort of epilogue or something like that. The Allman Brothers Band, yeah. I mean, I'm not a great player, so let's just put that out there right now. If I have any strengths, I'm, you know. So, this is the closest it's ever been. With 16 votes, it was 50-50, and with 17 votes, the SX-240 just barely ekes out the win. But I would say, considering how, you know, tight our community is there with the voting, that I think it really comes down to just whichever synth you prefer. You know, if you were listening to tonight's stream and you thought, wow, you know, the SX-240, what a cool sound. Or wow, the Juno-6 just sounds so perfect all the time. I think both are very fair takes. Yeah, when are we getting a Juno 1000? Oh, you never got the poll. I don't know. I feel like my internet's acting weird. But I did get some votes on it. So, damn it. Which way would you have voted, Aquatic, just out of curiosity? Because if you had voted back for the Juno, it would be 50-50 again. I think it's not impossible that I've said before, I think the Roland TR-1000 was a test to see if people would actually spend money on analog stuff from Roland, and it appears that they will. So if I was Roland, I wouldn't invest in re-releasing the Jupiter 8 until I re-released the Juno 60. You know, that would be the one I would release, not a 106 clone. But we will see what they do. I think that I'm waiting on... okay, so Aquatic voted Juno, which would have put us back at a dead 50-50 split, which I think is pretty cool. That, you know, this might be the first time we've ever done a stream where at the end of a versus stream, it's like, damn it, it's 50 fucking 50. I agree, Synthsonic. Best synth community. I have just a few drops left here. So, can I get a scum cheers for the absolute best community here on YouTube? Cheers! Spiritual, yes, Behringer is supposed to be giving us like a Jupiter 16 or something. They're supposed to be giving us a lot of stuff. We'll see. And we'll see how it sounds. Anyways, guys, continue to be excellent, and I will see you next week.